to this week's chapter of Beyond the Brink and Fighting Back. I'm Rosemary Armao, and my guest today is Mark Wittman, my old-time pal on the round table and a smart man who I normally love to talk to when the world seems crazy the way it does now. But we are having a major argument that we had to stop arguing in order to start the podcast, and we're gonna get right into it. And it is about reporting on the Qatar gifted airplane, the new Air Force One, that turns out to be, well, maybe not so safe. New York Times reported on this problem, reported on President Trump's lying about the problem, saying, oh yeah, he wasn't going to use the plane, but it wasn't because it wasn't safe. It was because he wanted to let the new plane be shown off to the troops in Europe. New York Times reports on this, and the response of the Trump administration was to send federal agents with subpoenas to the homes of reporters, the 5 reporters who worked on the story for the New York Times, and requiring them to come into court and reveal their sources. That's my setup. Mark, do you agree with me? Did I set it up fairly?
Yes, very
Okay.
much so, Rosemary. It's a pleasure as always to join you.
But we don't agree on this because I agree with the media organizations who are decrying this as an outrageous assault on the constitutionally protected media, free press, the right to gather news. And the president does not like the reporting. It has embarrassed him. And so he is now using the mighty power of the US government. It's an unprecedented step to go directly to the reporters and to their homes, not even to their office, to their homes. How intimidating, how deliberately intimidating is that? It is meant to chill and quash reporting on important topics. You think differently, I understand.
Yeah, Rosemary, let's just set the terms of engagement here. I agree that the administration is being heavy-handed, and I don't particularly care for this administration as a general rule. But I must say, I have always found it peculiar that in this country, journalists are allowed to take stolen information that they know is stolen, so long as they believe it's accurate. And even in cases where it's not clear, like this one, where there's law breaking going on that's significant to the public, they're still allowed to publish it. I find that peculiar generally. And in this specific case, because it does deal with the safety of the president, I think that the administration should be given a wide berth as to prohibiting the publication of this information. And now that it has been published, for pursuing the parties that have been involved in it. If I stood outside the Pentagon and someone handed me a stolen printer, even if I didn't pay them for it, it would still be a peculiar, if not illegal act. If someone hands me information that they have literally stolen, I don't understand why that's not law breaking, particularly when it comes to an issue like this that deals with the security of those on board Air Force One. You and I may or may not agree with the administration's assessment, but my view is I'm surprised that it's not its legal right to make the assessment that
Well, let me school you, Mark. This goes back to the Pentagon Papers, which involved war. Definitely national security was involved. And papers that showed decades worth of government deceit about the cause of that war, the execution of that war, the ambitions and the failures of that war were stolen, not by a reporter, but by one of the researchers who had worked on the papers, who felt that they should be public, and they had been instead secreted away in government files. So he stole those papers and delivered them to the New York Times and the Washington Post, which published them because of the public's right to know in a democracy. We have a right to know if our government is working honestly and efficiently and competently. And so they published those papers. And the Nixon administration did indeed bring the papers to court and went up to the Supreme Court. And they argued, just as you did, that this is, we have the right to decide what's national security and not. What do you stupid reporters know? This was dangerous and reckless. and the Supreme Court ruled against them. Reporters may not steal, they may not encourage others to steal, they can have nothing to do with the theft or the obtaining of the information. Or if they are talking to whistleblowers or people who have insight and get them to give information about the workings of government, they are allowed to print it. This is a long time policy in the United States. The other thing is that journalists are subpoenaed all the time, but only if, and these are again rules set out by the Supreme Court in a number of rulings, you subpoena journalists only if there is no other way to get the information, and if it's a matter of public interest. This is not a case of the public's right to know versus our wanting to know about it. This is information clearly in the public sphere, and journalists are allowed, yes, to stand, as you put it so colorfully, to stand outside the Pentagon saying, "Come on, give us that information, come on." And if we were to, and also one other thing, which also definitely irritates the hell out of Trump, they're allowed not to reveal who told them, who they coaxed to give the stolen information, as you put it. They can use anonymous sources. And Trump equates that one time after another with it's a lie. It isn't true if the source is not named. Again, ethical journalism, and that's definitely the New York Times, requires that you have 3 independent sources, that you reveal the names, at least to your editors, if not to the public, that you vet this material carefully and you use it. And if it were not for the use of unnamed sources, there are whole sections of government that would never get covered. One being, for example, the Pentagon budget. That would never be revealed because anything in the Pentagon becomes automatically, in the government's definition, national security. And like you, I mean, we do have areas of agreement. I am not saying that the public's right to know is absolute. Definitely not. I don't think you can publish, for example, weapon capability or intelligence sources or active law enforcement cases or tax information or medical records of people. There's a whole bunch of material that I do not think the media has the right to print. But this information about a plane that is definitely, we don't know if it's illegal. It should be illegal if it isn't, and that's reportable. But an ethical violation, perhaps, on the part of Donald Trump, a huge gift from a foreign government, which is something outlawed by our Constitution. And now it's not safe on top of all that. In the middle of a war, the president wants to fly in luxury rather than in safety. These are all matters that are plainly something the New York Times should be reporting about.
Rosemary, I think the crux of our disagreement is the following. I don't understand it as well as you, but I have a broad sense of the Pentagon Papers ruling. And there, it was systematic deception about a war in which Americans and frankly, Vietnamese and arguably Chinese and Cambodians were dying because of the action. Here, we have a president who's made a decision about the safety of an aircraft that he wants to ride on. And the press, I don't think the press has such a compelling right to more than counterbalance the fact that they've gotten stolen information. And it may well be the case that the Pentagon doesn't want our adversaries to know about any potential shortcomings on this aircraft. So to me, I get the Pentagon Papers, but I just think this is in a gray zone where it might endanger the president to release this information, even if he's endangering himself for being a bonehead, if you will. I still think it doesn't provide such a compelling public interest that we need to know about the counter-attack measures that are or are not available on Air Force One. And I also think, if I may go further, this distinction that I can sit outside the Pentagon and take stolen information and publish it, but once it's published, I get to run to a safety zone where I say, no, don't come to me. I read in one article, it said that the normal course of action is for the government to round up, focus on the individuals who are likely the leakers and found them that way. And the press is saying, I got stolen information from somebody, probably multiple somebodies, but don't come to me. Go put them under the bright light of interrogation first. I find that peculiar in two ways. Number one, who would ever want to be a source if the other side of the transaction serves you up in an instant when they start looking for guilty parties? And secondly, you knew it was stolen information and you're trying to act as if you have no responsibility for how it got disseminated.
I don't even know where to begin to refute all of this, Mark. Let me give some stabs at this. First of all, a reporter working with a source who is taking a risk to give information, and it often is not stolen information. It's information he knows about from the job he is in.
But can we agree? I'm sorry to interrupt, but can we agree it's probably information that he knows he or she?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, when you work overseas, you're talking with people who could actually go to jail for talking to a reporter and giving out this information. So yeah, there's no question about that. You work with someone, you develop a relationship in which you convince them that this is got to get out. This is important for the public to know about, and I'm asking you to take a risk. And that's why great investigative reporters do develop these sources who do that. They do take a risk, and they know full well what they're doing. The journalists, and they frequently take steps to hide some of their involvement so that it isn't so easy for Trump and his minions. Kash Patel, I guess, is working on this one to figure out who it is. Let's see, what else can I go after? I can't even remember all your points. I'm sputtering. You have me sputtering, damn it. Because I know this is great reporting. Okay. I also looked at the reporting after we talked earlier this morning, and I knew this was going to come up. And those reports are not so specific that says the plane is lacking ABC. It's very vague. If you read the story, it says it lacks counterterrorism measures. Now, do you seriously think our enemies don't know that? That is not a US built plane. It has not been years in the making. That's the whole story. It comes from Qatar. Qatar knows exactly what is in the plane and how much time has been taken. And named sources in the New York Times story and in follow-ups by other reporters, named experts are saying there's no way that plane is safe because of, and they give the reasons why, based on their experience, based on how long it takes to retrofit these planes with the requisite material. This is something, their reporting shows how reckless the president of the United States has been, how eager to get a luxurious plane that he's going to keep. That's a part of the story, and it doesn't work. We had to go back to the old Air Force One in the first week that he's been using it. That's a big story. And yes, the public, that should be out there.
I just don't see that there's such a compelling public interest in understanding that the president's plane isn't perfectly fit for purpose, that it justifies not only releasing illegal information, but then for the information that shouldn't be released, but then for the media to point the finger and say, well, don't we know we published something that wasn't supposed to be released to us, but go shake down our sources. And I will say, you and I both, I think, can agree that the United States is an outlier here. In the United Kingdom and Australia, the source and the journalist would be subject to a lot more legal risk. And in other Western democracies like Canada, you probably get closer to a gray area. So I don't think it's so unreasonable to be surprised that in the US, in a case like this, the journalists get a run to some imaginary safety zone and just point fingers at everybody else.
Who are they pointing fingers at? They're saying, don't come to us for the information. And the government themselves is saying, we're not after the reporters. We're really looking for the leakers. So it's the government coming to the reporters saying, be tattletales, or we're going to put you in jail and fine you a lot of money. They're the evil ones, not the journalists. I hate that the journalists are not being portrayed here as the brave and innovative defenders of American democracy. This is, and you're right, other countries do not do this. It is more dangerous for journalists elsewhere. They do not have the First Amendment.
I don't get how democracy is served by understanding this nuance about Air Force One.
Democracy is served when we know what our government is doing, what they're spending, if they're efficient, if they are running the government the way we want them to run it. But when we elected them, we wanted them to do certain things. Is that what's happening? And how can you separate this matter of the plane from other let me go over some of the other things that Trump has done. He's done no, just this, not, I'm talking about press attacks, the exact same thing, sending federal agents with subpoenas after reporters. Last month, he tried it with the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. They were stories on his military actions in Iran. He didn't like what they were publishing, and so he issued subpoenas. They've been quashed. In January, he actually raided the home of a Washington Post reporter, Hannah Nathanson, and her reporting was on Trump's efforts and Elon Musk's effort to reduce the size of the workforce. Again, the principle holds on matters of importance to public interest. And all three of those, I don't see how you separate the plane from those other two. Surely you think military action in Iran and shrinking the workforce are matters of public interest.
Look, the issue is you're saying to me, well, I can assure you that no foreign adversary gained any information about Air Force One by
From the
bringing,
newspaper. Right. They did not.
but you know, number one, I don't know that we know that for sure. And number two, if I'm asked to weigh that factor, on one side, I say to myself, what's the public get? We've learned that Donald Trump is a bonehead. If it's true that Donald Trump is a bonehead and he's less interested in security than he is in luxury, and if the administration, on the other hand, is telling me the adversaries don't know that we didn't, by some miracle, put all these things in place in a record time, but the New York Times has confirmed any suspicion that we didn't. I'm on the side of I don't see how this is compelling enough to justify the fact that everyone who shared this information knew they quote unquote shouldn't have been.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Really, you are so pissing me off. Okay, so why should you believe any investigative reporting? Why is any of it? Why not just wait until the government tells you, here's authorized information? By the way, Pete Hegseth loves this idea. Here's information that's true and authorized, and you can publish it. No problem with it. Investigative reporting is not saying that the public is going to immediately go out and do something. In fact, it's called IRA. Investigative reporters and editors use that acronym on purpose to show anger. The idea of investigative reporting is you alert and you annoy the public to what's going on. This is outrageous, and then they go to their congressmen and their senators and their representatives and they complain and they bring pressure on the government for change. That's the way investigative reporting works. It's not like the public gets anything immediately, but they get to know about their government and then can take action and make decisions about government because they're better informed. That's investigative reporting.
Do you think we're that much better off in the US than we would be if we were, say, in Australia having this conversation?
Australia is very much like the US model, but yes, the US is the model of investigative reporting for the world. And I know this because I spent 20 years working in Europe and Eastern Europe, especially, and in Africa, teaching this model. We do
Well,
it here.
okay, well, the UK would be the one where the journalists would be more at risk, right?
Uh, the UK has fewer protections and much more protections for government and for people who would bring the subjects, the potential subjects of investigative reporting. True.
The fact that we're talking about countermeasures on Air Force One, I understand your points, I respect your views, but I just can't get there.
Ah. All right, I'm giving up because we were going to run totally out of time. I'll just be yelling at you endlessly. Let us take another topic. We didn't talk about this when I saw you earlier in the day because it hadn't happened yet. There's been a ruling by a federal judge, an Obama judge, and I think that's probably significant, against Donald Trump and his Department of Justice in their settling of a case brought against the IRS. Donald Trump, if you recall, sued the IRS, saying it wrongfully allowed release of his very private tax records. New York Times had that, won a Pulitzer Prize on the strength of it. And he brought a couple $1 billion lawsuit against it. And the settlement, in quotes, was that a fund would be set up um, to compensate people who, like him, who had been hurt by reporting. I don't know, kind of a slush fund, and that he and his family would be exempt from prosecution by the IRS or on IRS related charges up to now forever. He can never be held responsible. We don't really exactly know what he's done that he's trying to get protection from, but he has an exemption. And a judge today ruled this was, she didn't just knock it down in a 56-page ruling. She called it just back dealing, like heavy-handed dealing. It wasn't even a legal case. And she referred the Trump lawyers to the Bar Association for disciplinary action, possible disciplinary action. It was a big rebuke. Are you surprised by this?
I don't think that the executive can stick his hand up the back of a Count Van Count puppet and have have the puppet sue him in court and call it a legitimate legal dispute.
Right.
A fundamental dispute for the courts between adversarial parties, for the courts to get involved. That very minimum standard was, you can't stick your hand up the back of a puppet and have the puppet sue you and then come to an agreement with the puppet that gives you and your family amnesty for past potential IRS violations. I am not surprised. I agree with the judge. I hadn't contemplated the notion that the lawyers would be referred to the bar. But when you take the puppet off the hand and ask what was really happening here, I get that as a consequence of this. I think it's
Well, and there's more happening too. Another court is trying to decide whether a purposeful fraud was perpetrated against the court because the DOJ, which is controlled by Donald Trump, and Donald Trump are both sides of the coin. And so, did they present this as a settlement and then trick the court into saying this? Well, okay, now we're going to drop the case and treat it like a settlement, even though it really wasn't. It was just all a setup. They're actually investigating that. And the other thing is that Todd Blanche, who played a big role in this, is up for Attorney General. I suspect this is going to come out in his confirmation hearings.
Look, again, at the heart of the court's responsibility or a minimum threshold for taking an issue to court is a legitimate dispute between two parties.
Right.
A concocted dispute between the same party who then said, "Oh, never mind. We've come to an agreement. We're not gonna sue Trump. We're gonna give him him and his family amnesty for his potential historical wrongdoing with respect to tax fraud." I'm a little, again, I wouldn't have contemplated referring the lawyers to the Bar Association. And I do think this is what you get when you're Donald Trump and the people who are left for you to choose as your potential, say, attorney general, that they have to sell out so publicly and so dramatically in order to even be considered for the position. This is not a surprise.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting confirmation hearings. I so want to hear it, so want to listen in on that. Listeners, we're talking to Mark Wittman, my old buddy from WAMC Roundtable days. He's an investment banker, a really smart guy. And one of the things that I want him to talk about with me today, not it's in the news all the time, but it isn't, I can't think of any top headline in the last few days, but it's AI. And we got talking about this in terms of what's ahead for our economy. People are very worried that with uh, trouble starting again, big trouble starting, missiles are flying again in Iran. Gas prices will soar. We're running out of quick fixes. Gas prices will go up. The economy is going to tank. And on top of all that, AI is going to take all our jobs. We're doomed. And Mark, you have as usual, an unconventional and rather optimistic view of things. Can you tell me about it?
Yeah, Rosemary, I actually don't think it's that unconventional, but if you think about I think the best analogy for this is the railroad boom, which took place in the United States. But another way of talking about it that your listeners are probably more familiar with is the dot-com boom. I do think we're talking about whether or not the conflagration around the Strait of Hormuz and in the Middle East could cause us economic disruption. And I said that that in and of itself probably was not that serious. But what I feared was that that, say, got layered on with the bursting of the AI bubble, akin to what happened with the dot-com mania. I do think there will be an adjustment that takes place, but I think that these adjustments are inevitable. And as we talked about before, if you owned pet.com, pets.com, and the bubble burst, you weren't very happy about your stock portfolio because I think that was one of the enterprises that effectively disappeared. But if you happen to own this crazy little retailer called Amazon, uh, you were very happy, and you could use that investment to pay for a lot of sins if you had bought some other dot-coms that didn't work out. And I think the inevitable bust in AI will look a lot like that. And in a free market, we let people take guesses or bets. I guess bets is a better word, or we could say we let them take chances around investments and we see what works out. I think inevitably, though, there will be a significant culling. The other part of AI, which I think is impossible to understand from our perspective today, is what it means for the job market. And I am far less fearful than some of the prognostications about the fact that we're all going to have to look for something, anything to do. And my analogy to that is if you were sitting in, say, Brooklyn Heights or in Manhattan, and you were part of the group in the carriage house helping to care for the horses that effectively drove everyone around the city or even drove merchandise around the city, and you started to see these cars show up, you said to yourself, it's over for us. We're never going to find work. They just buy the car and that's it. They don't need to grow the hay. They don't need to transport the hay. They don't need to have the horses, keep the horses, shoe the horses. They don't need to have the people who drive the horses, the people who make clothing for the drivers. And funny enough, we found something to do as the economy evolved for all of those people, including the people who made buggy whips. And I think that there is no way for anybody today to look at AI and to predict with any certainty that they know how it's going to transform the economy. And I think it is more likely, far more likely than not, that the economy will keep growing in ways that we just can't imagine. And I think the other example of that, which I think is a hoot and something I'd recommend your listeners find, is there is Bob Newhart simulated a call where he was basically a potential investor in the airline industry. And he took a call from the Wright brothers as they breathlessly called him after their first flight and described this plane that carried one guy 50 feet and said, well, in 50 years, we're going to have this whole industry of airline travel. And Bob Newhart says, well, but you just told me the plane only holds one and it only goes 50 feet and only if you start at the top of a hill.
I am going to put a link to this on the publicity for this episode because it is hilarious. And on the wing, do they have to go on the wing? And how many you fit on a wing at one time? 5, huh? And is there a way we could get a John on it? It's hilarious, and
Right.
it does tell your
The
story
point
well.
the point is that from where we sit in the carriage house now, or talking to the Wright brothers after their first
Right.
flight, it is if someone today are accurately articulates the future with AI in it, it is only by accident, and it is impossible for them to understand what things will look like at this juncture.
You know, you mentioned it and then skipped over it because you had a better analogy, you think, with the dot-com bust, but the railroads. Can you go over that again? That one resonated with me.
There was a at the time, I think they called it the Great Depression before what we now call the Great Depression. And as the railroads were being built across the country, investors made bets on which cities would grow
Right.
which particular railroads would be successful, and they became highly speculative, highly levered bets. And at that point in time, there was very little regulation on the banks and on investors in terms of how much leverage could be used. And some railroads didn't pan out. Some towns that people thought would become railroad stops didn't. And banks had extended investors credit to make these bets or investments. And it led to a period of severe economic downturn in the United States as a result. But that didn't mean that
Hmm.
the railroads didn't ultimately become an incredible engine of economic growth. This boom
And
and bust cycle is the inevitable consequence of the way we run our free markets in this country.
well, it isn't just boom and bust. I get that part, but it's also a dislocation is going to occur. Overall, the economy may soar. It may not just recover, but be stronger than ever. But in the meantime, in the process to getting there, there are groups of people, there are occupations that are going to suffer.
There will be tremendous if any of the predictions, the more extreme predictions come to pass, there will be extreme dislocation in this country. And
Right.
I will say it's important for us and everyone on the planet, particularly those in free markets, to look back at the mistakes we made around globalization. The fact that
Right.
globalization was a boon to the economy did not mean that all boats uh, rose as a consequence, particularly, by the way, in the industrial center of this country, which is why in this country and around the world, we've got this force of economic discontent, which is propelling populism.
Right.
So I think at the same time that I am hopeful that we're not going to all become unemployed, I also take what we saw with globalization as a cautionary tale. And governments have to be far more efficient and wise about taking some of the resources or the productivity that is unleashed by this next period of growth and ensuring that some of those resources are properly used to reorient those in the economy who might otherwise suffer if they're not provided for.
Yes, we do such a good job at equaling income and making sure there's no imbalance in our society. We have high hopes for that. I am.
I understand. I understand that we've done a horrible job, but hopefully,
We learned a
what we
lesson.
learned through but again, we haven't done a horrible job though, Rosemary. If you look back to the 19 before World War I in this country, the inequity and the disequilibrium was horrific, and we don't have that level of disparity today. So somewhere along the way, we get it right sometimes and not right others. You've got to hope that during this period of potentially rapid change around AI, that we do a better job than we've done historically. And there is historical precedent for getting it partially right.
I have to point out that about this time, oh, 10 years ago, we were arguing on the round table about Brexit. And Rich Honan, I remember, he's not exactly a conservative, but he's definitely not a Democrat. And he said, no, it's not going to be that bad. The effects on the state are not going to be that bad, and there is going to be some real benefits. And we are now seeing 10 years in that Brexit has been horrific for Great Britain. They've lost in productivity. They've lost, well, in all economic measures, they're behind where they could or should be because of Brexit, which, as you point out, was powered by this populism caused by the people left out of the advances of the benefits of globalization. And the fix in that case was full out populism, get out of the EU and go off on our own, sovereignty over everything. And the country has suffered for it. So I worry about those adjustments coming. We don't have a good record figuring these things out, either while they're happening or after. And
Yeah, that's true. I would highlight that I think a lot of the local resistance to AI data centers is propelled by fears around AI and what it means for jobs and the rest of it. And hopefully politicians, because that's a physical presence, that's AI, people who are worried can object to in their locality. And I hope that those who are responsible for civic and governmental planning are realizing that that's a signal that if we don't assure people they won't be left behind. The other option is that there is a public backlash against AI, and the United States loses its competitive advantage as the leading developer of this technology.
Right. Well, we're fast running out of time, but I'm hoping I can get you in closing to talk about something you mentioned in our kind of, I guess, a rehearsal talk today, and that was the amazing vitality and massive strength of this economy, that it's taken all kinds of blows in the last few years, and it's still so strong. Can you talk about that? That's another optimistic.
We've never seen an economy like this, which is not to say that it doesn't have faults, but even going back to the fears around energy prices, we are now a net exporter of oil. So as an economy, now there is a secondary feedback effect of higher oil prices on inflation. So I'm not convinced that on a fully net basis, the United States is better off when oil prices climb and climb quickly. But we have a huge offset as an exporter of oil that we never had as an economy before. We are a tremendous engine. We are incredibly diversified in ways that we have not been before as a nation. We are certainly not without our problems, but the economic envy of the world. And that is why I think it is so hard to wrangle this economy, if you will, into a meaningful recession. I think you've seen rolling downturns through segments of the economy, but I think the economy as a whole is so incredibly diverse that it's hard to bring it to ground and for it to experience a true recession. And even frankly, if we do, I don't think we have the risk of it being nearly as severe as it has been historically.
Okay, you can see, listeners, why I like talking to Mark. That's like such a upbeat and hopeful view. You're completely wrong about journalists, however, and that brings us to our toast for the evening, which I would like to make to the First Amendment. It's there, it needs to be protected. And I hope Donald Trump continues to lose in court when he goes against media organizations. And I hope they have the courage to realize that they need to protect the amendment too and fight back. So that's my toast for the end of this show. Thank you, Mark, for being with me.
You're always welcome, and I will always toast the First Amendment with you, even if we'll squabble about exactly how it's implemented in this versus other countries.
Oh, you had to get the last word in, didn't you?